Welcome to Speaking of the Spectrum. We're back again. This is your host, Shahrukh Sultan, and I'm here with my awesome co-host, Human Lightning Bolt, Human Kaizen Machine Gun, and Master Joe Templin.
Good to see you, Shahrukh.
Good to see you again, Joe. Always a pleasure. As a reminder for those of you who might be tuning into this is your first episode, both Joe and I have the privilege of being board members on the Autism Society Greater Hudson Region. We're a nonprofit charity full of heart. We're trying to do a lot of good in the community for everyone related to autism. As I've said before in an earlier podcast, it's not just somebody on the spectrum. It's the parents, caregivers, siblings, providers, right? And the more that number shrinks from 1 in 55, used to be 1 in 100, 1 in 55, now 1 in 36 children have autism spectrum, the more the need and the demand to support those kind of families and individuals increases, which is something that our society is trying really hard to do, and which is where your support and your donations will go a long way. So head over to our website, asghr.org/donate, or just look at the link in the description below or go to our bio, and please make some kind of a support donation. It'll go a long way. Speaking of supporters, for Speaking of the Spectrum, there's also our awesome sponsors, Pulse MD Urgent Care Centers. They have locations all over the Hudson region. They've got real state-of-the-art facilities, so God forbid you ever need any kind of medical attention, they'll be there to help you. And tell them we sent you. It'll make them happy. Joe, what's been new as an autism dad today? Or this week? Where do we start?
Where do we start? It's actually, as usual, my neuronormal kid that is driving me nuts. And not just because he's my mini-me, but one of the things that we very often see with families where you have a child on the spectrum and one or more who are not, is that those who are not on the spectrum end up stepping up in a lot of ways. Yeah. They prematurely become adults. And this actually impacts them psychologically or later on in life.
In a positive or a...
It's a combination, because they do learn a lot of responsibility early on, but because they don't get necessarily as much of a chance to experience childhood, then there's this repression that bursts forth down the road. And sometimes we see this in college, sometimes we see it later. And one of the things is that when they have this parentification, it negatively impacts their ability to have adult relationships in their lives. So this is one of the things that I don't want to say cautionary tale, but keep an eye on your neuronormal children, because they will overcompensate in a lot of ways to protect their brother or sister, because of their perception that it is my job to look out for them. And we need to remind them that it is your responsibility, but it's not your job. Don't let it become a burden.
You know? Right. Yeah, we have sort of similar but different circumstances, because my oldest son, who's 12, nonverbal in the spectrum, by the time we had our younger son, who is now 6, turning 6 in a few weeks, my older son's already been through a lot of the development on the care we've been giving him, and we've already changed our social life and our structures around him. Mm-hmm. So places we won't go to, right? There's more places on the list that we can't go to than we do go to. Right. And a lot of those places we do go to aren't necessarily for neurotypical children, like loud places or parks or movies or even. Mm-hmm. So by the time the little guy comes along, right, we as parents, we have to like consciously think about, hey, I want to make sure he's not missing out on things that he would normally go to. So on weekends, we're like usually the whole family would, maybe go on a trip or something, or go to the park or something. Or if it's like a hiking thing, I really have to think about, all right, I want to make sure he's not missing out on something, because, we're a little bit cautious about the older one. But then it kind of comes around both ways, because now that the younger one's doing it, the older one who's on the spectrum might follow him a little bit. So you're right, he does become a bit of a leader and a supporting member. But you're right, like as parents, we really got to be, just keep an eye on that, keep a pulse on that, and make sure they go along for that ride.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And we need to treat them fairly, but not necessarily equally.
Right.
And so like my kids joke that, I don't have a favorite because I hate them all equally. But
it can't be true.
Absolutely.
This is being recorded. So if they see this, they'll know. I'm just saying.
They've really
This could be held in court. Just kidding.
But as my youngest, Colin, who's on the spectrum, said, yes, but you love us all individually.
Right.
And so the ways that we demonstrate this, because I have my oldest and the youngest on the spectrum at different points on it, but the way that I need to show that to them differs, and not just because of their age, but because of how they perceive and how they, are overstimulated in particular ways, or what they enjoy. So as you have multiple kids, and remember, I'm one of 6 kids, a huge Irish farm family, you need to try and treat them all fairly, but doing what has the right impact for that particular child.
Right. It's almost like a tug of war, like a balancing act each time, right? Like, I'm sure there's many families out there who have a similar situation where their younger one's neurotypical, and he's always like, well, why does my older brother get to have an iPad all day long and I can't have it, right? And it's funny because sometimes my wife and I, maybe he's just our oldest child, and the oldest child is, I guess, sometimes leaning towards being the favorite. I'm not going to say that on camera, but I remember when he was younger, if he'd cry, we'd stop everything. We're like, why is he crying and everything? And now with the younger one, if he's crying, we're like, oh, he'll be okay. If he falls down, he'll be fine. Let him work through it, right? And he's like, why do you guys not love me? We're like, we do. Trust me. There's just, a balancing act to do here.
And by the time you get to like the 6th kid, it's like, oh, you're not dead.
6, oh God, no.
As my mom taught my kids, suck it up, rub some dirt on it, you're fine.
There you go. So speaking of children, and one of the things we like to do on the show is share a fact of the day, or fact of the episode, right? Something that really catches our eye as we Google through and learn all these different amazing things about autism. So speaking of children, it is reported that about 50% of children with autism, and this is really impressive in its own way. This is a 2-part fact, but the first part of it is 50% of children with autism have average or above average intellectual ability. Like half of the children with autism have average or above average intellectual ability, right? So what that tells me is that, if you're a parent your kid just got diagnosed with autism, don't give up hope. That and I will speak about this more a little bit later, but don't give up hope. There's more in that child than you might even know. But like I said, this is a two-factor fact. The second fact is, of those 50%, right, or of all children on the autism, only about 85% of adults with autism are unemployed.
That's mind-blowing.
So think about that for a second. Let's go back a second. So 50%, you're telling me half of the autistic population has either average or above average intellectual ability, right? And then 85% of them are not working. And I feel like that is a huge opportunity loss for society, community, but also employers. And I really do hope in the coming years, right, that starts to change. Like, there is more recognition out there, there's more awareness, but whatever I feel like organizations and companies do to bridge that gap and get recognize that talent in the untapped talent, right, in your local community needs to happen, because one of the things I'll talk about is how every episode we talk about who's the hero, right? Sure. Like, who's our hero of the day or hero of the week. And this episode, it's not necessarily just one hero. I'm going to go through a whole list, because this is probably the easiest Google search I've ever done, but I never thought of doing before until the podcast. And I just Googled, hey Google, what are some of the famous autistic celebrities? And it gave me names from all the way back from Leonardo, Michelangelo. I'm not naming Ninja Turtles here, but the artists, Isaac Newton, Einstein. Like, obviously there wasn't a formal diagnosis back then, but because of their mental capacity and what the way they kind of functioned, it is believed that these people were autistic or on the spectrum, right? So now you're talking about people that literally changed our world as we see it today, scientists and artists and whatnot, that changed the way we do things and see things. And then come to the modern day, there's modern names here that are going to blow your mind. I mean, we can think of Elon Musk and Bill Gates, right? These are, I'm sure, like, if I mentioned this, is that you kind of, right, you kind of get it. Yeah, they're super smart. Sir Anthony Hopkins.
Whoa.
Right?
Whoa, dude.
Right? Like,
Odin?
Oh, Mr. Odin himself, yeah. Has Asperger's of some form. Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokemon. I mean, how huge of a hit is Pokemon? It's everywhere, right? And he's known to have autism. And this last name kind of really blew my mind, is because I'm a huge fan of his work. Jerry Seinfeld. And I'm not sure if it's openly that he's autistic, but they say that because of his unique way of looking at things and his unique way of humor, where he really takes things for a fact, and that's how he's built it in the comedy, that he has autistic characteristics. And I mean, if you watch one of his, I mean, obviously Seinfeld is the most famous show of his, but there's a show on Netflix that he does called Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. Have you ever seen? I love it because all the show is about is literally that. It's Jerry picks up the car at the beginning of the show that he feels this car matches the personality of his guest, and his guest is another comedian. He drives up to that guest, picks him up from their house, and they literally just drive around. They
And
get
they
coffee,
have a road trip.
and they just not even road trip, but just a local drive with a stop at a diner, grab a coffee, and they're having a conversation. It's literally about nothing, but
Just like Seinfeld.
just like Seinfeld, right? But this is literally just two people. And what really caught my attention was that the way that Jerry Seinfeld looks at the world is that his wit comes from his perspective of how how you and me are having a normal conversation, and he'll find something hilarious out of it. And that to me was like really interesting, was like how, which kind of like clicked in me. So when I come back to what I said earlier about half of the 50% of the children have autism, and if you're a parent who just learned that your child has autism, believe me, don't give up hope. You could be sitting with the next Jerry Seinfeld or Einstein. It's staggering in its own way. Today's episode is I'm honestly like, I don't even think I can introduce our guest, because to be honest, I'm a little fan struck over here. I was talking about all these things about people who are autistic have super average intellectual ability, and I talked about all this list of heroes. But our next guest is I'm going to say he's a bit of a hero of mine. I've talked to you once before, Dr. Rodney Mogen, but like Joe, I will let you have the honors of introducing, because like I said, I'm a little bit starstruck.
And this is one of those ones where I get to play I got cool friends card. So Dr. Rodney and I have known each other for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years at this point. Dr. Rodney has his Doctor of Business Administration. Yes, I actually read his PhD dissertation. It's wickedly cool. It took him a while to find it for me, also because he was traveling. Dr. Rodney, or Rodney as I call him, has a interesting background. He was a successful college athlete and is now running a hugely successful financial services practice. He's currently sitting in Austin, Texas. We double-checked that he was actually there today. And he is the president of NAFA Texas, which is the National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors. And so he represents, I believe it's 5,000-ish financial advisors on the state and national level. Not typically what somebody would think of when they're thinking of somebody on the spectrum.
Amazing. And
Yes,
what I
he
really
is.
loved about your bio, Dr. Rodney, was I looked online. Again, I was a bit of a fan, so I was stalking a little bit online, but I saw that you'd said that, your bio said that autism doesn't define you, but you define autism. So I'd love to hear more about it. Like, sort of, as our hero today, what's your origin story? Where did it all begin?
And thank you, Joe and Shahrukh, for having me on today. But like I said when we were talking, Shahrukh, I was more limited verbal when I was growing up. Probably not till I want to say 13 or 14 did I start being a little bit more verbal. I say limited verbal because I really didn't talk, but I talked when I needed to. And I think even today, I'm very, I just completed a doctorate in economics as well, and back in December. And so I'm a very economical person with my words, is what I'm trying to get at. And so
Got it.
I only spoke when I needed to, and I'll tell a quick story here in a second. But the sports actually helped me when I was 14, 15, 16 to actually find my voice. I was a champion swimmer. I was also a basketball player, and wanted to really just, swimming I enjoy because I was a long distance swimmer, and I would swim and swim and swim, and I could relax. I still do that to this day. I can relax my brain. I can just be in my own world and swim. But basketball, that's where I found my voice, because I started to become the leader on the team. And, you use the stat of 50% average or above average intelligence. From working with a lot of people in the autistic community and working with other people, I actually think that number's a lot higher. I just think we can't measure it. Right. Especially when they are nonverbal and they have some other potential issues, I don't know what to call it. It's just, whatever, but different abilities that we just don't know how to measure it, and we don't know how to release it. So I actually think that there's a lot more people out there that are higher intelligent, but we just don't know how to measure it per se.
Right, like when we'd spoken earlier, you'd mentioned about how, because I think I mentioned to you that my kid's nonverbal, and I asked you like what are some of the things I could do, and you said you made a very impacting statement. You said we're not even on the same communication plane, right?
Yep. Exactly, and I think that goes to the origin story of really where I learned to be. I don't know. This sounds condescending when I say it, but to be on the same plane was when I was playing. For me, when I was playing basketball and being part of something, because Joe knows this, when he sees me at a big group, that's generally where Joe and I interact, is in bigger rooms. I'm generally to the side, and I'm 7'2", so I stand out, but I generally go to the side and I try to get as far away from the crowd as possible. I freak out in those things. It is draining. It is tiring for me. I have to psych myself up. I will actually give you a little secret to what I do. Anytime I go to a conference, and I go to a lot of conferences, whether I'm speaking, networking, whatever, different things, I find the attendee list, and like I know Joe, I can have a conversation with Joe anytime. But what I will do is I will go find 15, 20 people that I've never met before. I will then find them on LinkedIn. It sounds like I'm stalking, but I'm not. But I'll find them on LinkedIn. I will find what interesting things about them. I'll maybe go to their company website, things like that, and then I will have prepared questions in my head so that I can go find them and have a conversation, because that calms me down. Because otherwise, I will freak out in that room. And I think that's actually a good segue to kind of the other stat you were talking about, a 2-part factoid. You have 50% above average intelligence, but 85% of the autistic community are not working. I think that's actually a fault on employers, personally, because they create, an environment that is uniform or different things like that. I think that if they really tried to sit down and try to identify, hey, here are these people, here's what they may need, but like me, I have to constantly think in my head, don't say what's in your head. And the reason why is sometimes I will just blurt it out. Mm-hmm. And people don't always like being or hearing something that's blunt. I might hear a concept and I might just say, that's moronic. I'm not trying to insult them.
Exactly like my oldest child.
Yeah, I'm not trying to insult them. It's just in my head right away. That's moronic. That's idiocy. That makes no sense.
But we can all do better with more honesty, I feel. That's what it is. And
there's honesty, but also tact. And
I get tact.
I have a little bit of trouble with tact at times too. But one of the reasons why there's this unemployment issue very often is, so let's say you have an 18-year-old who's on the spectrum, like my child, and they end up working in like a restaurant, and they end up opening their mouth and saying that something's moronic to their boss, who isn't probably the most well-educated or aware of individuals on the spectrum, and then you're fired. And that's exactly what happened to him. So now he's working for a startup company with a bunch of other technologists and hardcore nerds, and so he's actually encouraged in that space. So his mindset and skill set blend well in that sort of environment, whereas working in a diner, it was out of alignment in some ways. And so what Rodney was talking about how the employer, the leadership, needs to look at these individuals and say, how can we utilize them? Where can we put them on the bus that is actually appropriate for them and is going to help our organization the best?
And one of the things I've been learning a lot as we're doing this podcast and talking to different folks, right, is that I think we talked about this in the last episode where we'd mentioned that a lot of things that we do for autistic people, like if we do them to support them, it actually makes it a better environment for everybody. Right, like I think back to when we landed in Dubai, what I talked about before, and the entire airport was silent because it was meant to accommodate autistic children or people. So if there's no announcements, there's nice and calming effect. But everybody enjoys that. Like imagine getting into JFK versus that kind of an environment. It's like as a normal traveler, I would really enjoy that, And then if you think about making a work environment that's better for folks who are on the autistic spectrum, then I'm pretty sure there's autistic individuals are not the only ones that could benefit from that. Like it's such a multifold like result there.
I agree. And to Joe's point, I was almost fired 5-6 times into my financial services career when I worked with the larger companies. That's why I run my own business. That's why I'm out there, because I will actually tell people that's wrong or whatever. And it's not that I'm trying to be untactful. It's not that I'm trying to be rude. It's just that's just how my brain's wired. And my company's called Solve Your Puzzles. And so one of the things that I do is my grandfather loved to do jigsaw puzzles. And he hated sometimes when I would come over or come visit him for a couple of weeks, because he might have 1 or 2 jigsaw puzzles that he was working on around the house. I'd have him solve within a couple of hours, and it would be something he was working on for months. He lived in Minnesota, so he would have been doing it during the winter. I come in early summer, I've got the puzzles done, and he only had them like a quarter of the way done. And so I can take puzzles, I can see things, and if you've ever seen the show Numbers, it was about a mathematician and an FBI agent. I kind of relate to that show because whenever Charlie would actually do something in his head and explain it, you would see kind of how that is, like, the water drops falling and he can then do the equation. That's what I see. And that's how I see the world. I see things that way. And Joe read my dissertation, and he probably saw that I'm creating this model of how to create a successful business, because I can see that, but then I had to translate it into how other people or neurotypical individuals will be able to translate it. That was difficult. So
right. So selfishly a little bit, Rodney, obviously I mentioned I'm a parent of a child who's nonverbal and who's 12 years old, and then when I spoke to you, it gave me a lot of hope because of all of your fine work and where you are now. But share with us a little bit more about your early years, like how sort of you overcame that communication gap, and what sort of prompted you to like really fight through it. And I know you mentioned like you found that solace in like basketball and swimming, but can we delve into that a little bit more? I'd love to hear more.
Definitely. So I was privileged. I will say that my mom worked at a private school in Los Angeles, and I had a really good opportunity to go to that school and have people that I think were able to see me in a different way. But I had one teacher, actually 2 of them, but one that really stands out. His name was Dr. Holbeck, and I think he recognized at an early age, because this is a school where I went from the time I was 2 years old till I graduated high school. So it's a small private school, but I think if I was in a different school, I may not be talking with you right now. And again, that's my story. I'm not saying anybody else's, but I was able to have Dr. Holbeck, who saw something, and one time he actually pulled me aside and he actually said, a lot of your teachers don't think you're smart. You don't talk, you don't interact, you don't do anything. And when you take the tests, you pass, but a lot of them, like, especially like with math, I can't show my work. So I just completed a doctorate in economics. That was the hardest part for me, because I had to show my work, filling all that out. I know the answer. How I get there is hard for me to explain. So a lot of my teachers thought I was cheating. A lot of different things like that. And so what really kind of drew me out was Dr. Holbeck, who would actually pull me aside as we're walking down the hallway. He might be with another teacher, and he was a history teacher, but he would actually ask me questions about math or about something going on, and he would force me to answer. And that actually helped, along with sports, but that helped me in the other classes, because now the other teachers saw that, holy crap, excuse my language, but wow, this kid actually knows what he's doing. This kid, and instead of them trying to put me in a box, they allowed me to be who I was. Because I would also walk around and lap around the classroom all, for an hour. I can't sit still. And especially, like I said, I'm a tall guy, so it would be those little small, rigid school desks with the little table and the seat.
Right.
that didn't work for me. Okay, so I could barely fit in to sit there. If I get up, I'd be wearing the desk, so I just would walk around. Sometimes I'd sit on top of the desk, and because teachers started to realize that I wasn't being disrespectful, they realized that I was actually doing that to actually be part of the room. They included me more, and so I think that helped. Now, I will be 100% straightforward. I was bullied. I was bullied growing up. I was different. I was tall. I didn't act right. All those different things. I'm an only child. I was bullied. What really helped stop that was my success at sports, because all of a sudden now they saw that I had something to offer, and then they started to include me. And so I think by doing that, that actually helped me kind of connect. And I really do have a hard time connecting with other people. Like I said earlier, I do research. I try to know who, before we talked, I actually looked you up on LinkedIn. I did it, I did all those different things. I
feel honored. Like that's thank you for that.
And so I do that stuff so that I can feel comfortable and have a good conversation. But I script everything in my life. And, one of the things...
Is that your cheat code, basically? Is that your planning before the conversation?
That is one of my cheat codes. Yep. Right. And, we've probably heard of things called masking or autism masking before. And I just learned recently that me creating a script is an autistic mask, because it's so that I can fit in with I call them norms, but so that I can fit in with norms. If I meet someone new, I've got 25 questions I have memorized. They are programmed in. Where are you from? Who you are? What's your name? What do you do? Different questions, and then I've got response questions to that. And I was called the android. I was called, when I was growing up, Star Trek: The Next Generation was on, so I was called Commander Data a lot. I was tall. I was, very unanimated, but robotic. Yep. And that, but I've learned to go through that and get better at it as I get older. But that, that's, I hope that helps. But that's, it's taken a lot of work to get to the point today where I have a little animation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that all with us. This gives us so much more insight into what the possibilities are, especially as parents, but hopefully everybody else listening on the episode too has a huge takeaway from this. I really appreciate you sharing it. I know one of the things that I'm starting to realize is that water is almost like a common denominator, your interaction with water, what you kind of get from moving water. Because you mentioned swimming was, a big factor in it. So can you share a little bit about how sort of swimming helped you find your voice or your sort of calmness, or how the experience was? Why swimming?
Yeah. So I'm going to really out myself, and Joe's going to just probably hold it against me at every conference going forward. But
that's what friends do.
Exactly.
This whole podcast was a setup for that, by the way.
Exactly. So I read two things when I was 7. Okay. The first one is going to shock everyone, and the second one, it's probably not. But remember, I'm 7. First one was I read The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, and I probably comprehended about 85% of it. Okay.
And that's why you have a doctorate now in economics. Right, exactly. Because of that book.
This is just impressive fact after impressive. I'm no longer impressed with you, Joe. I think I'm over you. I think I'm over you now. In an earlier episode, I called you a Swiss Army knife within Swiss Army knives, but I think I'm over it. You were my new, my Swiss Army knife inception is happening here.
So I live my life about economics. I like to call it my thing. My jewel is economics and politics. I like how that all kind of works together. So I really do understand that pretty well. And I've read Wealth of Nations now probably about 15 more times since. So I really, truly understand it. But the other thing that I read was DC Universe comic books.
Yes, thank you. I don't understand why Marvel is such a big hit.
Because Marvel's better.
I'm
sorry.
This is
a separate episode.
DC is better.
Not. Thank you. Yes, 100%.
We have real.
We're over, Joe.
Boom.
We are over, Joe. We are over.
I will agree with Joe about Thor, just because I'm of Norwegian ancestry, so mythology is there. But if you really look at DC versus Marvel, there are probably two really good comics in the Marvel universe, in my opinion, and that is G.I. Joe and Thor. But in the DC universe, this is what I was getting at, is I actually felt more at home reading about Wonder Woman, and I'm getting to your water question here.
Okay.
But who I really, I don't know, fell in love with, but really enamored with, was Aquaman. He had this whole kingdom under the sea. He was quiet, but he could in tune with the the fish, the animals, things like that. But he felt in tune with an environment. And if you look at everything else, everyone else was trying to figure out how to fit into the environment. He felt comfortable in his environment. And so me getting in the water, I kind of feel like I literally imagine I am Aquaman every time I'm swimming. I am, whether I'm swimming in the ocean or I'm swimming in a lake or I'm swimming in a pool, I'm in tune with that environment, and it calms me down, it relaxes me. And, I'm not a sprinter. I am a long distance guy. I would swim and compete in the 500 free, the 800, the 1650. When I still actually do competitions now. I do 2 mile, 3 mile open water swims. I love it. 30 minutes, 40 minutes in the water where no one's talking to me. I know that sounds bad, but no one's talking to me. It's just
that
me.
Sounds very zen.
Yeah.
As an ultra runner, I'm
is.
totally with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't like running as much, but I'm also tall. So swimming, running and putting all that weight on there doesn't feel good. But swimming just allows me to be in tune with my environment. So that's why water is actually very important to me, is because it probably also doesn't hurt that Aquaman had blonde hair. So, I connected with Aquaman, okay, he looks like me, he's big, that's why I also like Thor too, because, Norse, but, but the, I still will say DC Universe is way better than Marvel. So there we go.
Thank you so much for that. I really needed to hear that today, because I've been saying that to everybody. Nobody believes me. And now coming from you, it's such a reassurance.
Well, DC also has better bad guys. Come on.
DC has better characters developed overall, and
the Joker, is by far the best.
Yes, the
Lobo,
best villain. I mean, even Lex Luthor is pretty impressive. I mean, he's a rich guy. He's smarter because Superman has all these superpowers. He doesn't have a superpower. He's just
so he
rich.
needs to find another way to compete.
And I know I'm going a little bit off topic here, but one of my favorite quotes from watching Smallville, right? I mean, if you remember that show back in the day, which started in the 2000s, right? It was almost their origin story for Superman, Lex Luthor, where they were friends. And there was a piece there where Lex says to Clark, is I exist to keep Superman in check, right? The whole reason the universe has created me is otherwise Superman would become a god and take over the world, but I exist to keep you in check. And that to me was his defining moment as a villain, where I really like that character too. But anyway, coming back to our hero in the virtual room here, Dr. Rodney, thank you so much for spending all this time with us. Joe, any parting comments for your old friend?
Well, going back to you at the conferences, one of the things that I actually do when I see you is something that, after I realized that you were on the spectrum and you isolated like that on purpose a little bit because you were feeling a little overwhelmed or uncomfortable, is at conferences, I go look for him. And he's 7'2", it's easy to find him.
Yeah.
But, so that I can go on over and just be around you, so that if you need an outlet, you've got that friendly face. You've got that person who's there, but I try to not impose or break in so that you can do your thing, but knowing that you've got somebody there as your backstop if need be. And that's one of the things that we as parents or friends of people who are on the spectrum, the allies, can be there to support without necessarily fighting that war for them.
Right. That's very impactful.
Very much appreciated, because I know that I get that friendly face, but I also know he's not trying to get in my face. He's not trying to get into my personal space.
Right.
And that is really, really helpful. And again, I think that goes back to, real quick, and I'll sum it up real quick, but you keep talking about 85% not in the community not working. Well, think about when you're in an office environment. More autistic people probably can be working now that we're doing a lot more things virtually. But
Yeah.
think about when you're not, in an office environment. I have to wear earplugs when I'm in an actual office or when I'm at a conference or things like that because the noise is just deafening. I can hear every conversation going on. Just think what that's doing in my head. But when I have someone that's coming up to me that I know, that I'm comfortable with, that is kind of in a way creating a barrier or a buffer for me, and then maybe he's calming me down. What if you had those people or allies in the work environment, the workplace, giving people, again, it's all about educating the employers. It's all about educating the people around there. There is a YouTuber, or there was a YouTuber, I don't know if he's still doing it, but called Darman. And he did some different things on autism. And one of the things that, and I think Joe knows this about me, I do a lot of disability insurance. So the word disability is important in my life. But I liked what he said is, autism is not a disability. It's a different ability.
Different ability.
And that is something that when I'm close out all my talks, I actually say that it's just a different ability. So I do appreciate the opportunity to come on today. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much, Rodney. This is, like I said, I know we talked about all kinds of celebrities today. We talked about Aquaman, and we thank you for supporting DC Comics as well. But more than everything, thank you so much for giving a parent like me, some hope, some insight, but more than importantly, that hope. And we usually wrap up the show with like a takeaway. And for me personally, the takeaway today is what I already mentioned earlier: is like, do not lose hope when your child is diagnosed with autism. You could be sitting on the next Jerry Seinfeld, the next Elon Musk, or the next Dr. Rodney Mogen, who is, I'd love to have you back someday and talk to you more. But thank you so much for your time.
Anytime.
This has been Speaking of the Spectrum. Hope you all enjoyed our conversation today. We'll speak soon. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.